He is one of the pioneering Indian researchers in the field of quantum mechanics, contributing significantly to the establishment and growth of quantum information science. His notable achievements include formulating ideas that utilize quantum indistinguishability for efficient entanglement production, proposing innovative experiments to empirically verify quantum contextuality and the quantum zero effect, contributing to foundational studies linking quantum mechanics with real-life experiments. He has received numerous prestigious awards and honors for his significant contribution, including Fellow of the National Academy of Science, 2011, Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship 2002, B.M. Birla Science Prize 1995, Associate Membership of the International Center for Theoretical Physics from Italy 1995, Homi Bhabha Fellowship 1993, Associate of the Indian Academy of Sciences 1987, and Indian National Science Academy Medal for Young Scientists 1996. He has authored and co-authored several influential books and numerous peer-reviewed articles. Some of his major publications include Conceptual Foundation of Quantum Physics, an overview from modern perspective, Einstein's struggle with quantum theory, a reappraisal, co-authored with Andrew Whitaker, in your teacup. In your teacup, co-authored with Parthogos. He has over 100 publications in international journals. Let us please welcome with a big round of applause to Professor Home.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And as people are settling down after the tea session, let me just spend a few minutes giving some preliminary remarks. First of all, thanks organizers for providing me this opportunity. And let me first begin with a disclaimer that I'm not an expert or scholar or on the theory of consciousness as such, but I am a quantum physicist. I've spent 40 years of research on the foundational aspects of quantum physics, but of the study of consciousness. And I shall mention the overall. I had the good fortune of interacting with some of the top minds in physics. I worked with them, including David Bohm, Roger Penrose, and so on. So I've also discussed with them about consciousness, and Penrose I've been closely interacting for many years. He had visited us many times, and I know about his interaction with Bhaktivedanta Institute. And that was also one of the main reasons why first I got attracted to this institute, heard about this institute. It was from Roger Penrose. So given this background, and by talking with various distinguished physicists over my research pursuits and concerning quantum physics, there are several distinct aspects of consciousness. One is what is consciousness, the nature of consciousness. The other is about developing what is called scientific understanding of consciousness. One is understanding consciousness from a broader perspective, which may involve various means understanding consciousness. But from a scientific perspective, to what extent we can understand consciousness, that is one line of study. And the another line of study that has emerged is that to what extent quantum theory can be relevant to the study of consciousness, and distinct from this line of studies and the further line of study as to whether consciousness, invoking consciousness, is necessary for addressing some fundamental quantum problems. It is this latter aspect which I shall focus in today's talk. So it is very important to be clear about what I am trying to talk about. I am not trying to explain the emergence of how human consciousness emerges from classical or quantum physics. This is an outstanding issue. But the most fundamental conceptual problem of quantum mechanics is the quantum measurement problem. And it is in addressing that problem that many outstanding physicists, starting from Wigner, whatever quotations you have here, Roger Penrose, Wigner, physicists, they're all main interest about consciousness, why consciousness is at all should be relevant to a quantum physicist like me. Why I should be interested in consciousness, leaving aside the cultural, philosophical, spiritual aspect, is because of this quantum measurement problem, the heart problem of quantum mechanics, which still today remains. And addressing this problem from various angles is one of the challenging pursuits of modern times. So I shall focus on that aspect. So for that, I have to first explain what is quantum measurement problem. So, and quantum measurement problem, to put it bluntly, is that how does an outcome of a measurement occur? How to explain this process quantum mechanically? Now one may wonder, what is so great about explaining the occurrence of a definite outcome? Science we always predict, and so, but quantum theory, that's the why it is. So understanding what is quantum measurement problem is a big deal. And today it's a limited time, so I shall make a modest attempt to first explain what it is, this problem, and why human conscious perception may play a role in that, has a scope for playing a role in this. And that has motivated the original suggestion starting from Wigner, Penrose, and others, that why consciousness should at all be relevant to science. And then the other way around of studies have been that invoking quantum mechanics to analyze consciousness, and another emerging line of study is this quantum phenomena. This is the quantum issue, I'm saying, quantum measurement problem. It is a fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics. Consciousness is maybe relevant to that, and it's realized. Other fundamental quantum features, such as quantum entanglement, you must have heard a lot about quantum entanglement because it is part of the folklore, modern, like AI, quantum entanglement. In fact, if you haven't heard, you should hear. Just pick up, because I must say that because human quantum entanglement is now going to be underpinning the 21st technology of 21st century. Cryptography, communication, all these things, quantum computing, these are all based on entanglement. And this is the property which philosophically excited Einstein from 1935, the famous Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, Schrödinger's cat paradox, and all these things, so Schrödinger. So there is a long history to it. I'm not going. It would require a separate talk to explain the relevance of quantum entanglement to the study of consciousness. That would be a separate point here, which I have not mentioned because we cannot. But I cannot resist a temptation of mentioning just yesterday, just to drive home the point, and that I'm doing that slight distraction that may extend my time a bit, but I think it is very important, it is worth. Because we all hear about science, quantum theory, that now, yesterday itself, in one of the top-notch physics journals, which many physicists should know about, Physical Review, a very important paper. It's a coincidence because I am in that field, a collaborator abroad because we were working now, and he's in China. So I am reading out. So there has been a report in Science Alert, which is about the paper published just yesterday in Physical Review E. And I'm just reading some passages from that report and then the first few sentences of that paper, Physical Review E, that has appeared last. It will be interesting. So quantum entanglement, so it is a slight distraction from the main line of talk I had planned because of this development. I just happened to see yesterday late afternoon this paper. This report begins with a nice para which will attract all of you. A silent symphony is playing inside your brain right now as neurological pathways synchronize in an electromagnetic chorus that is thought to give rise to consciousness. And understanding how it gives rise to consciousness, there is the role of quantum entanglement, that there may be quantum correlations between particles which are much stronger than classical correlations and which has various enigmatic features associated with it. It's a long story starting from Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox. But just yesterday, the paper by the Chinese physicists have shown how the entangled photons emitted by the carbon-hydrogen bonds in nerve cell insulation can synchronize activity within the brain. And this work is thought to have also ramifications for the Penrose Hameroff model for the understanding of consciousness. So I will not, and then a nice remark is made there that it is easy to see why there is an appeal looking to quantum physics to explain consciousness. For one thing, both have a kind of weirdness to them, a mix of predictability and randomness that is hard to pin down. And when I talk about that, the significance of this remark will be clearer. So these problems are there, whether a quantum phenomenon in the brain can give rise to the occurrence of a definite outcome. And a remark is made that brains might not work like classical quantum computers, but sprinkling with quantum magic, just merely sprinkling with quantum magic would not lead to an incomprehensible. So we need concentrated studies. And for that, this is the first serious effort which has been accepted in a journal like Physical Review. And the paper has the abstract. Just first sentence of that abstract explains the spirit behind this type of scientific works going on now. That consciousness within the brain hinges on the synchronized activities of millions of neurons, but the mechanism responsible for orchestrating such synchronization remains elusive. And this paper suggests that quantum entanglement, and they have proposed an experiment to test their model, how quantum entanglement can play a role in orchestrating such synchronization. It's a Physical Review e-journal published yesterday by the Chinese authors. Okay, so with that prelude, I just go on to explain. Now, my concern here is to explain, to talk about how does quantum and how does human observation is expected to play a role in the quantum measurement problem. That's all. Okay. Because of the paucity of time, I shall be skipping the slides. So first, one can spend time. It will require really a long time. First, what is classical realism? Just I say in one line now, that classical realism, because now it's a day of one-day cricket, one-liner in TV bites and so on. So if I'm asked by a TV channel to give a bite on classical realism, it would be simply systems are assumed to have properties independent of whether I look at it or not. And I can predict what it will do later if I have enough information about its initial state. Anything, coin tossing, anything. If I know a precise information, I can predict which one, but it may be difficult. But this coin has landed head or tail, irrespective of my looking at it. But in quantum mechanics, this is simply not true. So why it is not true? and so on. So I'm not going into, but the point I'm emphasizing is that there is a drastic qualitative distinction between microscopic and macroscopic levels of reality. And the very legitimacy of the cut is at issue if one believes that quantum mechanics is a universal theory. And that really is that whatever theory you propose, scientific theory of consciousness or anything, it will involve both micro and macro aspects, because there are microscopic entities, atoms, molecules involved. But ultimately, the person who is making the subjective and the thing has to be amplified at the macro level to generate perception, the feeling, which is a property of the body. So, and since quantum mechanics is a universal theory, so it is expected that you should be able to apply quantum mechanics to explain the whole phenomena all the way from the micro to macro level. But there are problems with quantum mechanics in applying at the classical level or at the macro level. So I will not talk further about it. About the basic features of quantum theory, I shall not go into any mathematics or anything, just remark that in quantum mechanics, in classical theory, a state is described, your chair or anything is described by its initial position and velocity. If one knows initial position and velocity, one can predict the trajectory and everything. So the state of an object is described by the dynamical coordinates of the particle. Fixed. But in quantum physics, the state of an object is described by a complex wave function, which is known as psi function. That was suggested by Schrödinger. So, and this is the famous Schrödinger equation. So this replaces Newton's equation of motion. So that much is sufficient for our talk, that the quantum mechanical state is described by wave function, which is called psi function. That means it's a complex mathematical quantity, and it changes with time according to this differential equation. So it has striking difference both in form and content with Newton's equation of motion. Now we come to measurement. Now, any measurement is a process by which you can read off a definite outcome corresponding to some property of the apparatus. Say, for example, you are detecting particles in a screen. So the particle falls on a screen, even if you are detecting cosmic ray particles or distant particles or particles in the laboratory, whatever. Ultimately, there are some detecting devices, screens or clicks of counters. There are plates, photographic plates, where you can register the particles and then look at it. The spots, you can look at it. So these are all property of the apparatus, which is related to the property of the system you are trying to measure. From there, we infer the property of the system, like the current we infer by looking at the deflection of the needle. So it is the property of the needle you are observing. From there, you are inferring the property of the current. So, but the important point is that in classical physics, it can always be assumed that this interaction involved between the measuring system and the apparatus can be made as small as we like. That is very important. Just by looking at it. Looking at it means even if you have whatever instrument with which you record, you interact, register the event in a plate, in a computer data sheet. In this process, some interaction may be involved, but it can be minimized. The effect on the observed system can be made as small as we like. But in quantum physics, if two systems interact, and even after their interaction is over during measurement, this is where the entanglement comes in. The composite system can remain in an entangled state. This is a very important feature. And this is, as this new work also I mentioned, this is going to be increasingly important. And I'm sure by the time next year your conference is held, there will be many more. And at that time, I will have very few people in the audience who have not heard about entanglement or have not heard about these works. Because the fascinating another development has taken place, like quantum biology of birds, which is that superposition of states. Because this quantum mechanics, another fundamental feature is that Schrodinger equation solutions, the superposition means an object, when it is not observed, can exist in multiple states at once. As I already mentioned, the key difference in classical physics, the object is in a state which you can reveal by minimum disturbance. So it is in a definite state even before measurement. But in quantum mechanics, a system in general is in multiple states before observation. And any measurement process just picks out one of them. And some inevitable disturbance is involved in it. So this is in a line, the essence of quantum physics measurement. And this is a most profound feature of nature, which is going to play increasingly fundamental role in biological phenomena and everywhere, and will have implications in consciousness. Even in the Penrose model, the way it occurs involves all these features. Now, the important development that is expected to come out in that these things seem to be now becoming experimentally testable. It's not a matter of speculation. Here, scientists may say anything will not be a hard science until it can be tested. So that possibility has come, like this paper I mentioned yesterday. It has got published in Physical Review because it has proposed a concrete doable experiment where we can synthesize. Similarly, with the bird migration problem, how the long-distance migratory birds find their way. It has been discovered that quantum superposition of states occurring in certain protein molecules in the bird's brain, they are very susceptible to magnetic field. And the way they affect this superposition enables the bird to locate Earth's poles. So in this way, quantum biologists are studying birds, migratory birds, locating their direction, their destination. That is a conscious process. That is very much all the definitions of consciousness we heard in today's morning. That includes that perception. This is a glorious example. And in this area, some progress has been made, which has been incidentally also mentioned in this write-up about this work. So, I'm skipping all these parts. So I just ask you to concentrate, to focus on this line. So in any interaction, if you ignore the mathematics, in any interaction between the system and the apparatus, at the end of the measurement process, if you describe the whole thing quantum mechanically, that is the important point. Apparatus is a big object. Any counter, a photographic plate, these are all big objects. So we'll say quantum mechanics applies only to electron proton. No, the underlying, now there's been a lot of developments which have shown that quantum mechanics can be applied there are increasing studies to show that quantum mechanics can be applied at the level of, the demonstration has showed for large macromolecules, large objects, and even for small cricket ball like that. So then you can talk about describing the measurement interaction fully quantum mechanically, the emergent. Then you land up with such entangled state. And when a state is entangled, that means quantum mechanical description of a measurement cannot ascribe separate states to the system and the apparatus at the end of any measurement process. This is the fundamental puzzle, because the apparatus can be macroscopic, which is most dramatically exemplified by Schrödinger's cat example. Schrödinger, because of this measurement problem, thought about this cat paradox and later wrote articles about all the various possibilities of consciousness and so on. But the origin is this one, that one should be aware of. And Schrödinger's cat paradox, the cat is imagined as a measuring apparatus. If you are not convinced whatever I have said earlier, just think of a radioactive atom, which is a microscopic object. It has a possibility of emitting alpha or gamma ray or beta particles. So if that, whether this object has decayed or not, emitted a particle or not, I want to find it out. This is my measurement, that whether that object has emitted this alpha or beta particle. So then that is my intended measurement, and my measuring system is the measured system is the radioactive atom, which is a microscopic. But I'm measuring it through a counter, which is a microscopic object, detecting the alpha particle. So the interaction has to be described quantum mechanically. Then you have this entangled state. And Schrodinger imagine, instead of the counter, if you have a cat, and the cat is killed by that radioactive particle. Or there are other versions where people don't. John Bell preferred not to kill the cat because of the now politically incorrect. So you put a milk bottle and it hits. So the cat drinking the milk or not. So if the cat has drunk milk, definitely it had the radioactive atom has emitted the particle. So in this way, measurement is done. But the main point is that at the end of this whole process described quantum mechanically, it should be in a superposition of states. That means in multiple states at once. Still, quantum mechanics does not ensure emergence of the definite state, that the cat is either alive or dead. Because you describe this process, cat interacting with the radioactive atom. At the end of the day, any quantum mechanical description will have multiple states, one of them corresponding to cat alive, the other to cat dead. So how to explain the emergence? That I meant by saying emergence of a definite outcome. Seeing the apparatus in one state or the other, corresponding to different outcomes. And at the end of any measuring process, you have that, which quantum mechanically cannot be consistently ensured within the standard framework. So much studies have been done over the last 50 years, enlarging the quantum standard framework, proposing new models, and so on. So I'm not going through all this. So this is what the quantum measurement problem is. And that is what I meant, that when all these questions are still remain unaddressed. And this is the famous remark by John Bell, which tried to summarize the problem, and that in classical theory, let me just paraphrase it instead of reading it out. In classical theory, one may say also human observer is implicit. You could have asked the question that why bring quantum mechanics, classical mechanics, what happens? And this is beautifully was answered by John Bell. He said that even in human observer, for what is interesting if not experience? But a human observer is no trouble in classical theory. Why? Because you can always include he or Harsha in the entire description. And at the entire, and at the, by what John Bell said, postulating a psychophysical parallelism. That is, supposing his or her experience to be correlated with some functions of the coordinates in the theory. But in quantum mechanics, no such correspondence is possible. That's why the human, some kind of observable, is not only essential, but also essentially outside quantum mechanics. This is what makes quantum mechanics relevant to the study of consciousness. You cannot, something is required to embody the observation process, but this is not possible without going beyond the standard framework of quantum mechanics. Now, this question has been much debated, much studied, and one of the famous models proposed were by David Bohm, which I mentioned, I had the fortune of working. So he proposed his famous Bohm model or causal model, enlarging the framework of quantum mechanics to address other various issues of quantum mechanics, including the measurement problem. But there are debates whether this is really the adequate, the Bohmian approach is adequate or not. There are criticisms to so I am leaving out other all discussions. The most widely accepted approach to the quantum measurement problem by the quantum physicists is by invoking the collapse of wave function. This is called wave function collapse, and there have been dynamical models of wave function collapse proposed, that it simply postulates that the cat was in a superposition of alive and dead states. So it collapses to one or the other. That we can describe dynamically through equation. And how that collapse occurs, how long it takes, that all depends upon how you model that process. So this registration of a definite outcome is possible because of the collapse of wave function. And collapse has to be described as a physical process by modifying Schrodinger's equation, as I said. And then it is at that point when this it became rather acute to realize that you need to invoke something extra to explain quantum measurement problem. How occurrence, a definite outcome occurs. If you don't believe in Bohmian model, if you don't believe that the standard framework, it is just enough to calculate and things that it works. If you want to really explain the stuff. This is where Wigner came up with his famous remark, which is quoted everywhere whenever there is consciousness study. But the origin of this remark is the measurement problem. Wigner's point was that collapse of wave function occurs. That would make the perception of definite measurement outcomes possible. So it was his conjecture, but it was a conjecture. And then he made it much earlier. I have quoted this reference in this book because this is available. Wigner's original remark is in a place which is not easily available. But this was made by Wigner in 60s, around long back. And then it is only in later, in very recently, these people, they were able to formulate the actual mathematical model of wave function collapse so that people can take it very serious. That's why Wigner's remark was totally ignored because of various reasons. First of all, it was a very speculative, philosophic, metaphysical. As I said, you need to, what is the basis? And second of all, the term collapse of wave function. You talk with any working physicist, you'll say, forget about collapse. You can do everything you want to do with quantum mechanics, not without talking about collapse. This is true. This is true. That's why these issues. But now, gradually, after all this, that is a long history. I've spent 40 years of my life on that. I know the change. I worked with David Bohm. This whole area was 10 years or 59 years ago dismissed as out. Even all those hardcore studies in foundation for which Nobel Prize was awarded the year before. That also has a history. I had been working in this field. 20 years back, the mainstream physicists would have scoffed at it. Now Nobel Prize was given because it found applications. Entanglement has become now such a byword that I can tell you, you must know this word if you are an educated person. Okay. So, but anyway, so this is another very seminal work done by where they came up with the collapse model. This occurred in 1986. And it was around that time that Penrose wrote his book, started writing his book, Emperors. I know this because I had been interacting. I was with Penrose in 84, 85 for my postdoctoral studies. So that Emperor's New Mind, someone had mentioned. So that was written in 87, around that time when Penrose was getting interested. But was all related. And then this collapse model, they modified the Schrodinger dynamics and suggested how actually a superposition of states, that means, can collapse to one of them. Say a cat can collapse to either alive or dead. How actually mathematically. So that was, and you may say that was made late 80s, early 90s. And it was only recently, last about a couple of years back, it has been now experimental tests have started and initial experimental results came up, which are now published in Nature Physics, Nature. So it has become a highly respectable. You can test these models experimentally. Now the global quest is going towards testing these collapse models. But now let us forget about this. You will say, I've spent how much time? Now we say, okay, so what consciousness? Why are you speaking here? You may ask me. How do I justify getting lunch from the organizers? Now here, please give me patience and 5 minutes extra, because I spend the extra 5 minutes to give you this flash news about that. So anyway, so this is a seminal paper which should be considered in any field conference on scientific theory of consciousness. Why? Because this is this Europhysics paper. They applied this is really a, what I am tempted to use the word I already used the word seminal, but it really deserves, because it applies this actual collapse models, the mathematically precise collapse model, to the study of human observation process. Because regarding the conscious observation perception, you should distinguish between two aspects which are not usually done. One is that collapse occurs either whether I'm aware of the outcome that I'm observing. It is a process. Can it be explained entirely occurring in the human eye or in the brain? So these are two different. It could be that in the eye itself, when it is registered, then through the neural circuit, automatically the visual perception occurs. Or there are other processes occurring in the brain, neural pathway, that gives rise to our visual perception of a definite outcome. What gives rise to our perception of a definite outcome? So this paper suggests, I call it the BDF paper, and what it assumes that this treatment is based on regarding human observation to be necessarily required to complete any quantum measurement process. This is their hypothesis. This is in line with what Wigner had remarked. So Wigner's remark, now I remember, it was made in mid-60s. So what he made in mid-60s as a purely speculative, it is here, this is a scientific study and mathematical modeling, everything has been done. So it is based on this assumption. You may question this assumption, then you forget about this paper. But if you accept this assumption, this is human, and there is a prima facie logical need to accept this prima facie, or to at least consider this assumption seriously, because as I mentioned, the other proposed solutions to the quantum measurement problem have been found to be inadequate. So it is entirely a scientifically rigorous approach. The various solutions. So I try to also study this possibility. And then what happens? And it considers a few photons to impinge on the retina of a human. It's a very precise mathematical modeling they do. And based on the empirical fact that the human eye can observe only a few photons, 5 to 6 photons, human eye can observe and register in the brain that I have observed 4, 5, or 6 photons, that I'm consciously aware there are 5 and 6 photons. So that conscious awareness occurs So then hypothesis is made that a superposition of states reaching the eye must collapse before being transformed into the perception of a definite outcome in the brain. This is the supposition they make. Whenever you perceive observing photons or not, what happens? Precisely speaking, either the outcome has been registered already in the eye, or it has to be registered in the brain. And these wave function collapse models are applied to study the biochemical processes occurring that we know so far, that whether the superposition really collapses consistent with such models. At this stage, it is important to note that for weak light perceptions, very precise experiments have been done with a few photons. And it is found that human beings can perceive weak light within 100 milliseconds. So that is the human reaction time, 100 milliseconds. Therefore, if the BDF hypothesis has to be true, the wave function collapse must occur within this time scale. So thus, then the BDF questioned whether the existing models satisfy this criteria, that the collapse occurs. Then one can say, okay, we have a valid case to say that quantum mechanics is relevant here. Wave function collapse can explain how our perception of a definite outcome occurs. And here, of course, I have mentioned, it assumes that the eye detecting photons and our visual cortices processing wave function collapse leads to the awareness of a definite outcome of animation. This one may question, that has to be further studied, that if one accepts that, the point is, if you regard this as a supposition, then this supposition can be studied. The consistency of this supposition and its empirical tenability can be studied. So it's a scientifically valid supposition that the process should occur within this time scale. And I'm not going into further details how they analyze the biochemical processes involved in the photo detection in the eye, involving rhodopsin molecule, its transformation and other process. But the important point is that by suitable modeling of wave function collapse, that means in describing these processes, quantum mechanics is applied. These interactions and the chemical interactions, ionic channels, taking into account all this, how an electric signal is generated, which is transmitted to the optic nerve and so on. And by analyzing this whole process, they derive some lower bound on the collapse rate and claimed that this is smaller than the human reaction time. That means before we perceive collapse, if you describe quantum mechanically the entire process, then the wave function collapse must have occurred if you believe in the wave function collapse models, which I said, which are being independently now tested. I'm putting in all caveats. This is not a claim. This is how actual scientific investigation proceeds. So just to make the point, it is now becoming a hard science. You invoke that collapse model, you say, how are you sure this is the right one? Yes. Independent experiments are done, underground experiments. That is another long story. But that is why 2024 I can talk about this. Before that, I would not have ventured to come to this conference and give a talk, to be very honest with you. Because I'm not like Roger Penrose or others who have studied this topic so deeply. I'm just a quantum physicist. And so let me know that BDF work was done in 2010, and its importance has increased just in recent years That is because of the fact that wave function collapse model has become testable. Recently, experiments have been done, all these last few years, development. So all these things I'm talking about are all experimentally probes and the modeling they have used independent biochemical studies that um, have confirmed. And also, in their work, they had assumed 5 to 6 photons being seen by the human eye. But experiments have later shown, in this nature communication, that humans can even perceive single photons. This is a remarkable paper. So in view of this finding, one has been revisiting that BDF paper, their estimation of lower bound, and how it should be affected if you take in 1 photon instead of 5 to 6 photons, and whether still the collapse would occur within the reaction time. That remains debatable. And there are also critical aspects of BDF model which are being debated about. Like they have treated the entire process by ignoring the complexity of the medium involved. Like anyone who is in this profession of analyzing visual perception may be knowing this cytosol and cytoplasm media are present in our visual membrane and cortex cells and neural cortices. The presence of this cytosol component of the medium will also affect the BDF analysis. So people are doing rigorous studies, and this is the latest paper on this topic by a very eminent quantum physicist, Adrian Kent of University of Cambridge, which gives a concise update of this, what is the status of BDF work in 2024, and what kind of future studies one can do. So if anyone wants more references after the talk, I'm available. I can provide the references. And also, just to finally, this is the final slide. Thank you. So we had much earlier done work showing how I gave the cat example, but we did a work formulating the cat example in terms of DNA molecule. A DNA molecule as a photon detector that whether a source has emitted a photon or not, for that detection, you can use a DNA medium, because DNA has the property that if the photon is emitted in the UV range, so we suggested that whatever Schrödinger's example can be modified. That radioactive atom, if you then convert it into UV photons, whatever photons are emitted by a cesium iodide crystal has that property. Then UV photon, we all use this in the aquaguard, UV photon deforms the DNA molecule, that is how, by breaking its 3 double bonds. And what is interesting, if you put that DNA molecule in the photolyase enzyme, this particular enzyme, that enzyme can distinguish between DNA molecules whose 2 bonds have been deformed, and distinguish them from DNA molecules with just single bonds. So the deformation of the DNA molecule can be seen by those photolyase enzymes. So DNA molecule itself you cannot observe directly, but as photolyase enzyme, if their attachment of photolyase enzyme to the DNA molecules, that you can observe by an electron microscope and by an extension. So the collapse of wave function must occur at the level of this enzyme attachment to DNA molecule. But then DNA molecule can be small, and enzyme molecules also that not large. And then we pointed out that the existing collapse models cannot explain that process. How do the outcome occurs in that process? How this distinction occurs? Now that was done in 1996. Now these things are becoming more important and revisited. Now people have pointed out the electron microscope is not necessary. It is even at the human eye can observe whether the photolysis enzyme has got attached on it. So then the game becomes more interesting. How do you explain that? And how does a photolysis enzyme distinguish between them? That is another deeper question, as someone said. So the consciousness issue, as I was repeatedly emphasizing, I feel, has many facets. So you cannot. One is the consciousness in animals. And already with migratory birds, I explained a lot of studies. And that is one direction in which definitely you will get concrete. Already it is being accepted much that how migratory birds find their way. This is one of the most profound questions of science has been. So here's quantum superposition of states playing a role, and that people. So this photolysis enzyme detecting, distinguishing between deformed DNA and undeformed, that is another aspect where consciousness may hold a lot of secrets of consciousness in that being studied. So whenever you drink water from AquaGuard, the study of consciousness is also relevant to this whole property of DNA molecule that is being used. As I already mentioned this, and of course there is a famous Penrose approach about that. Penrose has more grand scheme. Since he has been here, I put a final line on that to put things in perspective. His aim is grander. He wants both the unification of quantum theory with gravity as well as explaining consciousness. That scientists are divided about how that would be achieved, but he at least the role of gravity in wave function collapse occurring in human brain. According to this approach, the collapse has to necessarily occur in the brain. And that is why his conjecture is that about cytoskeleton tubule structure of the neurons. The cytoskeleton structure of the neurons is relevant. So collapse occurring in the human brain. And for that, his latest book, Fashion, Faith, and Fantasy, has a very nice up-to-date discussion. I thought I mentioned that. It is. So thank you very much all for the patience. Let me end with just these open questions to summarize. Consistent with my talk, this is one aspect of consciousness study. Does collapse of wave function necessarily occur in the eye or in the brain? So we are making progress towards it, much to be studied, and what implications such studies will have for the nature of consciousness. And of course, I love this quote because we are not sure when we will be able to know the truth, but we are just trying to chase the truth, and this is true for this consciousness study very much. Thank you all.